Hi, my name is Reid. I'm a psychotherapist in San Francisco, California. And today I'd like to talk about recovery from feeling small after narcissistic abuse. So I think the survivor of narcissistic abuse is required to experience him or herself as smaller than the narcissist in a variety of ways. Again, the dynamic, the psychological dynamic in narcissistic abuse, starts with the narcissist's own core sense of worthlessness, and in addition, their intolerance of that feeling, that they believe it's unbearable for them, and again, typically unconsciously. So the solution they effect is to find that worthlessness in others, and by sort of in this pseudo way, ridding themselves of this feeling of worthlessness and finding it in the other, typically the survivor of the abuse, it affords them the ability to enact the defense mechanisms of denial that allow them to say, no, I'm not worthless. I am full of worth. I am better than most others. My needs, feelings, and so forth are more important than others. If the person upon whom the narcissist feelings of worthlessness are offloaded, if that person is dependent on the narcissist like a child is to a parent, then the ensuing dynamic is very much one of the parent is real big and important and authoritative, and in this case, the child, am small, meek, overmatched in relation to this sort of very powerful other. Not that, in some ways, particularly when the child is young, that's sort of true. They know that they're dealing with someone much physically bigger with more mental faculties than they have at that moment. Not that the kid explicitly knows that, but sort of is sensed. And so there's a genuine mismatch in capacities that can get sort of traumatizingly seared in to the child's sense of who he or she is in the world. In essence, it's this smallness that can result, a feeling of, I am going to be overmatched in any scenario that I encounter where there's some form of adversity or some form of conflict that I'm up against. And not just in times of conflict, but even in settings where the survivor is kind of setting forth to express him or herself. At work, say, giving a presentation, or in any kind of context, showing what one can do in the world, can feel as though one is this sort of Lilliputian or small, person in a land of giants trying to kind of measure up to them. Even though one may be an adult and by all rights, just, eye to eye with the people they're sort of presenting themselves to, but the traumatizing sort of overhang of this experience of feeling small in relationship, particularly to a narcissistic parent, can persist and result in the survivor kind of feeling like, a small person amongst giants, vulnerable to their scathing evaluation and even a crushing annihilation if these giants don't look upon fondly of the sort of felt to be small person that is the survivor. I'm just trying to kind of capture some of the subjective experience here that can result from having to sort of experience oneself as small in relationship to a very important other person when someone is young. And that other person happens to be narcissistic in this case. And what often can happen in the course of recovery is there can be a reflex to kind of go back to the feeling of smallness, and implicit in that is experiencing others as bigger. So I think there's good kind of rationale to that. The metaphor of boxing comes to mind. If let's say someone, okay, you are sort of in a boxing match, but one way or another, you're having to box someone who's like, let's say you're an amateur, and then this person is a pro with lots and lots of fights under their belt, also is 2 weight classes above. the feeling in the ring, if you're going to have to fight this opponent, is that one could get knocked out at any moment. And the gravest danger you might face in such a match, or mismatch as it were, is forgetting the disparity in skill level. Think of okay, let's say the seasoned person is Mike Tyson, and then this is like Mike Tyson in his prime, and this is just a sort of a regular Joe. Well, to sort of forget that you're in the ring with Mike Tyson would spell your doom. You'd walk into his punching range and risk a devastating outcome. So it's very important to kind of retain and stay aware that, hey, I'm smaller than Mike Tyson. I can't punch as hard. He punches way harder. Be very wary at all times and keep the distance. And don't provoke him. Don't think that I can provoke him and survive the retaliation. That strategy is very adaptive when you're in the ring with a Mike Tyson, which I think in a sense the child is with a narcissistic parent. The child's needing to not perturb that narcissistic parent's very fragile and volatile sense of self-worth in order to keep their eviscerating attack as infrequent or as minimal in damage as possible. And it's a tall order for the child, that they've got to consistently kind of keep reminding themselves, hey, I'm no Mike Tyson. I'm just an average person here, somehow in the boxing ring, and don't lose sight of that. So as adaptive as that is, the kind of constant requirement to keep reminding oneself that one's in the ring with someone who greatly overmatches them can kind of persist after the abuse has subsided, at the actual abuse. So, once one leaves the home in one's family of origin and goes on into their own adult life, this feeling of I need to remind myself that I am small in the service of my survival can persist. And I find that the process in recovery that works against this smallness is the eventual forgetting about the mismatch. That is, to begin to sort of, again, I'm going to extend this metaphor, but train and punch as though you're not in the ring with a Mike Tyson, but you're just, say, in the ring with someone of a similar weight class and skill level. And as that continues, one gradually forgets, or gets to forget, that harrowing encounter with a Mike Tyson in the ring. At the outset of recovery, that will be, I think, that will feel like a very, very dangerous, at least emotionally, proposition, because it's sort of saying, hey, forget the place you've been put in. Just go out there and act like you're, eye to eye with everyone else there in the world. But, often one's own system is saying, oh, no, you're not. You're, again, amongst giants who could squash you if you don't show tremendous deference to who they are and sort of exalt them and make sure, they know that you think you are much smaller than them. That this position can be the only sense of safe existence in the early stages of recovery one has known in one's life. And I want to say that with an eye towards recovery, that one tactic that's important to maybe note is that, typically each recall of, say, an attack one endured at the hands of a narcissistic parent or partner, in a way can kind of prime the system to kind of get back into that small state. And this can be very subtle. One might think it's fine to kind of think back on the times a narcissistic parent yelled at them or hit them or beat them, but often what happens is that the system does something to sort of shrink itself, because that is its sort of seared in kind of safety mechanism in the face of that type of threat, the narcissistic parent. So to the extent that it's possible, working, again, gradually to sort of shift one's attention from those memories. Now, intrusive memories of the kind we can do nothing about, but the sort of more solution solution searching efforts of going back over what was experienced to see if there's a sort of unlock in terms of thoughts about what happened that might be achieved for the survivor, and sort of then afford a big kind of healing moment. If that can be sort of challenged and one's attention paid more towards what one's doing in one's own life and the audiences one has around oneself today, that can be extremely helpful in this way. The goal here is getting to know one's true size, in the figurative sense, in the world today. And what I think is required for that is involving oneself in the activities in your life that afford different frames of reference for who you are in the world. And really just kind of like deepening one's engagement with those other frames of reference. For instance, kind of like, how did my colleagues respond to my presentation today? How do my friends today react when I show up and they see me, or I call or text them? How is it today to sort of move around in your body with no, exercise purpose or anything, but just to kind of move around, see, what it's like, even sort of like playing with your body, moving it. How does that feel today? All these, when the questions are posed that way, it invokes information that sort of informs who one actually is, what one's actual size is, again, today in the world. And over time, as that experience of these new frames of reference gets more and more ingrained in your experience, then the need to sort of check on the old mismatch of like, am I in the ring with a Mike Tyson? Or remember back when I was, would the skills, would what I have today serve me in that boxing match? And again, this is metaphorical. So more concretely, it might be like, hey, is the person I am today someone who could hold up under the strain of the withering rage of my narcissistic parent? That question, in essence, in the course of recovery, I think one gets to drop. It gets to drop posing it, and also, gets to drop the sort of mandate that one find an answer for that. Because the truth is that one, if one has survived a narcissistic parent, one will never face the same opponent, because one will never be in that same state of dependency as they were with the narcissistic parent, stated objectively. And so the more one gets to sort of like let that mismatch that they had to endure fade away in terms of their consciousness and how they think, measure, and know themselves to be in the world today, that, I believe, is how one's sort of actual size gets restored and the feelings of smallness sort of fade into the back. In a way, it's sort of like one doesn't go back and like conquer the stage boss, to hearken, I guess, like Super Mario Brothers, that was on stage one. One's on to new and other stages going forward. Now that analogy kind of breaks down because I don't know that Mario kind of goes from small to big in the later stages, but one might imagine. I think a good example of this is one that the comedian Chris Rock actually said recently, where he was bullied day in and day out growing up, and seemingly mostly by white other students. And here he is, he's achieved one of the top comedians in the world with incredible fame and wealth and accomplishment. And in one of the interviews, they were saying like, what would you say to one of those bullies if you encountered them? And he said something like, that he's been in therapy and he's worked a lot on the kind of abuse he suffered. And at this stage, he would have no real desire to take them to task for the treatment they did, not because he believes they're sort of these sympathetic figures, but more because for his own sake, it wouldn't sort of be commensurate with who he is now in the world. And I'm taking liberties to kind of editorialize his response, but that at least was my reading of his point there. That to kind of go back and try to say, rub the bully's face in it, would be maybe this effort to correct that mismatch he had to suffer back then. But by going back and revisiting that prior mismatch, it sort of can have the unanticipated consequence of kind of reinvigorating the groove that, I am small, or I once was small, and I need to be wary of the person who took advantage of my smallness back then. Because again, the truth is, whether you're Chris Rock or whoever it is, once you're out of the narcissistically abusive situation, you are not small anymore. But it takes time for, I think, consciousness and systems to kind of register that and get to kind of live in that regard. I guess in another way, it's sort of like driving without checking one's rear view mirror in this specific regard of trying to kind of prove to oneself that, hey, is it true? Can I really be like my full size as an individual versus sort of just beginning to act as if it is okay, and again, populating one's life with safe other people who encourage that, and then sort of beginning to accrue those experiences and accrue them. The term "fake it until you make it" comes to mind, and I think has real wisdom in this scenario. Because it's like the feeling of smallness doesn't get explicitly sort of disconfirmed, but rather it's like, no, all these other experiences build up that say, hey, you are a upstanding, welcome, valued person, and it just makes that smallness argument sort of dissipate into sort of the ether. But it's sort of important, I think, what I'm trying to describe is kind of not heeding that sort of siren call to go back to that mismatch, go back to that feeling of smallness, and try to prove that it's no longer a threat. Again, all within oneself. Well, I hope today was of some use in kind of tackling this notion of felt smallness and how sort of turning one's attention away from that feeling towards one's reception in the world today can be an important part of recovery. Well, thank you everyone for your continued support of this channel. I look forward to posting each week and really enjoy the comments. And it means a lot to know that these videos have been of some help to many of you. And I look forward to posting again next week, Sundays at 9 a.m. Pacific time. Take good care.